Hello, I'm Robert Barr. I'd like to talk to you about the prodigal son. Luke in chapter 15 records three of Jesus' parables that are related. The story of the prodigal son comes after the story of the lost sheep and the lost coin. In the first two stories, the owner went after them and hunted them until they found them. However, in this story, the father doesn't prevent his son from leaving, because he knows that if his son stays, his son will be there in body, but not in spirit. The father loves his son and wants what's best for him, but he knows that his son will never be happy if he's forced to stay. Therefore, he gives his son the freedom to leave, even though he will miss him and grieve for him while he's gone. His hope is that one day his son will recognize his mistake and return willingly. God could have made us to follow him blindly like the other animals. We wanted to have fellowship with us. And more important, he wanted us to manage and develop all that he had created. Therefore, he had to give man free will. There's no free will unless there is a choice. So God placed the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden and told Adam not to touch it. God knew what their choice would be, and it grieved him, but he knew it was the only way for Adam and Eve to be truly free. Adam and Eve listened to the devil and chose to leave all that God had provided for them for the illusion that the devil promised. God gives each one of us free will, and that means the freedom to make bad choices as well as good ones. Like the prodigal son, we too often decide to leave all that God provides and follow the illusion of something better. God knows we will never be happy until we come to him willingly. He misses us and grieves for us because he knows what we will go through, but he doesn't stop us because, like the prodigal son, we must learn it on our own. However, our choices have consequences. Every decision has consequences, whether good or bad. Some are minor consequences, like not getting cherry pie if we choose the apple pie, while others have major consequences. Drinking alcohol while driving could result in your death or the death of others. God has set down his commandments to warn us against things that will have bad consequences in order to help us avoid the bad consequences that will result. The devil tells us we can disobey God and not have to suffer the consequences, but it's all a lie. God allows us to suffer from our bad choices so that we'll learn not to make them. A traveler may get a map telling him how to get to his destination. However, he sees a shortcut that should get him there faster. He may have to travel a while and put up with a rough road, as well as delays and detours, till he realizes that he should have taken the road they recommended, that he needs to go back to the road he was told to take. However, it is the condition of the road, as well as the detours and delays, that tell him that he has taken the wrong road. If the road was smooth and without problems, he might never see any reason to take the road he was recommended. God knows what's best for us and came to show us how much better it is to follow him. But when we reject his guidance, he allows us to travel the rough road we choose, because he knows that we will not realize our mistake until we see the consequences of our choices. Prodigal son found out that his friends only lasted as long as his money did. When the money was gone, he was on his own. Eventually, he was reduced to feeding the pigs. Finally, he realized how much better he would be going home, even if it meant being treated like a servant, because the father's servants had it much better than what he had. He could not expect his father to accept him back, since he had refused to listen to his father and had left him. If his father did, it would probably be as a servant, because he no longer had any claim to his father's possessions. He had taken his inheritance and wasted it. However, when he returned, he found his father eagerly waiting for him and glad that he had returned. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they cut themselves off from God, because God can't look on sin. Yet God did not wipe them out and try to start over. He continued to call them to return. I was in a pastor's meeting one time when they were discussing topics for future programs. Someone suggested they talk about replacement theology. I'd never heard of it and asked about it. They told me that it believed that God had rejected the Jews because they would not accept him and replaced Judaism with the Christian church. I made the mistake of saying I could not believe how anyone would believe that. However, the looks I got told me that a number of the ministers there supported that theology. The Bible refutes such a doctrine. While God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden so they would not destroy it, he did not abandon them. He gave them children. In Genesis, God accepted Abel's offering. And when Cain, out of jealousy, killed Abel, God gave Adam and Eve another son to replace Abel. And it says, men began to call on the Lord, and the Lord did not reject them. When men rebelled against God and turned to their own way, God saw Noah's faithfulness and saved him from the flood. Later, he called Abraham to follow him. When God chose Joseph to lead his brothers, they rebelled and sold him into slavery. However, God did not abandon them, and Joseph provided for them in Egypt. God allowed them to go into slavery as punishment for the rebellion, but he did not abandon them. He eventually brought them out and gave them the land of Israel for an inheritance. When they turned against him again, he allowed them to be taken as slaves to Babylon. But he did not abandon them, and he brought them back to the land again. God continually told the Jews that he would never leave them nor forsake them. And God never goes back on his promises. When things seemed darkest for Israel, God sent Jesus to save them. Jesus was a Jew, a descendant of Abraham. While he denounced the Jewish leaders, he continued to worship in the temple and never rejected Judaism. Jesus died on the cross to take away our sins and restore our ability to approach God. God allowed the temple to be destroyed because it was no longer needed. But he did not reject the Jews. We no longer need a priest to intercede for us because we can now approach God, and Christ is in heaven interceding on our behalf. Jesus said that a shoot would rise out of the stump of Jesse. Though it seemed that Judaism was dying, God would raise up a remnant. In fact, most of the early followers were Jews, and the early church was mainly made up of Jews, until God led some of the apostles to go to the Gentiles. And the Gentiles were grafted into the remnant of the house of Israel. The Catholic Church fell back into the old temple worship, where the people come and worship, pay their tithes, and are blessed by the priest. They also returned to the old practice of the priest as intercessor for the people. The Inquisition was built as an attempt to rid the church of false doctrine, but it was mainly an attempt to rid the church of any who threatened the authority of the priests. Like the Jewish leaders, they also attacked anyone who questioned their authority. They also attacked the Jews and justified it by telling the people that God had rejected the Jews and replaced Judaism with the Catholic Church. They had justified their authority by claiming to be God's appointed representatives. As a result, God raised up a remnant to restore the church to serve God. After the Reformation, some denominations embraced the doctrine of replacement theology, though many have not. Such a view has led to various Protestant churches attacking Jews and Catholics, and even other Protestant denominations. It has led to the current fighting among denominations, which is a disgrace to the church. Down through the ages, other churches have strayed from the faith, but God continues to raise up a remnant to rebuild his church. While God allowed the Romans to destroy the temple and expel the Jews from Israel, God has not abandoned them and has continued to protect them. In 1946, God led the Jews back to Israel and has protected them from constant attacks by their enemies. Revelation tells us that one day the Jews will recognize Christ and will return to the church. In fact, we are currently seeing Jews flocking to Christ in great numbers. Revelation also states that in the last days there will stand before the throne 144,000 of the tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each tribe, and they will be joined by the saints in great numbers. It also does not make sense socially. Someone without God is like a baby. They want what they want when they want it. The child must learn to obey its parents. Parents do not normally kick the children out because they don't act like adults. The children have to learn to behave like adults. Spiritually, we are the same. God laid down the law to guide the Jews and teach them to obey. Those who accept Christ today also have to be taught to obey God. A few churches today do much to teach their members to walk with Christ, and many members are still babies in the faith. That is why there is so much fighting in the church. We are all sinners before we come to Christ, and afterwards we sometimes turn away from the faith during trials. If God rejected the Jews, he would also reject us just because we don't believe. And no one would ever be saved because none of us believed until we met Christ. And many have turned away from the faith, but God is calling them back. God didn't reject the Jewish nation, though some Jews did not believe. God expanded the borders of Israel to include the whole world and invited the Gentiles to join the Jews in all that God had promised them. God constantly seeks to find the lost and bring them back to the fold. He may allow us to go through trials to remind us how good we had it with him, but he's always happy to see us return. There are Christian churches today proclaiming support for Hamas, in spite of all the atrocities they have committed, and they are condemning Israel for trying to defend itself. That is dangerous because God has said he will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel, even if they curse it in the name of God. Such support is the black mark on the Christian church. In addition, it shows that the love of God is not in them. God even loves Muslims and is reaching out to them. As a result, many of them are turning to God in record numbers. It is not God's will that any are lost. Do not let anyone tell you that God will abandon you if you doubt. He will seek you and accept you if you return. It would be a shame if you missed out on heaven because someone convinced you that God didn't love you. No one is so far gone that he cannot return to God. Our nation has turned away from God and forgotten him. He has promised that he would hear our prayers and heal our land if we turn from our wicked ways and call out to him. Thank you.